Good morning. My name is Sean McEwen, and I'm the publisher of Inside Aging. I'd like to welcome you to our first Aged Care Innovators session. We've done a few webinars in the past, but this is certainly the first that we've focused just on those people who are, I suppose, leading the sector when it comes to innovation and change. So we've got a fairly big session. So what I might do is just introduce the speakers. But before I do, I'll just remind everybody that this is a live session, so that you can ask questions at the bottom of your screen just by typing in the question to the question box, and then we'll try and get to those sort of throughout, but we'll try and hold a few of them to the end as well. So put your questions in. We've already got a few questions that have been asked when people registered. So we'll get to those as well. So Georgie Armstrong, Georgie's the founder of Gretel Analytics. Georgie, in your own words, give us a sentence on what Gretel's all about.
Thanks, Sean, and hi, everybody. Gretel Analytics is a platform that reduces complexity of multiple data streams in residential aged care. So we aggregate data streams and we provide insights tailored to the needs of your residents to augment existing staff and reduce that busy time of writing up reports and knowing where to be.
Okay, great. And Simon Haseman. Simon's the co-founder of Halo. Over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Sean. Nice to be here with everyone. So yeah, I'm the co-founder and head of partnerships and growth at Halo. That essentially means I get to do cool stuff like this and come and talk to people across the sector around innovation and discuss cool things that are kind of happening around the sector. Halo is the only care service platform that's been purpose-built for care teams. So essentially we connect clients and families to the admin teams, and we're all about removing repetitive tasks, helping keep people informed, and really saving time, effort, and cost for the provider teams. Teams are extremely overworked at the moment, especially across home care, dealing with kind of manual processes, phone calls and emails and things along those lines. So we really focus on simplifying the communication and inquiry management across the admin teams. And really, I guess the mission of the company is to help people stay at home and independent for longer.
Great, thanks, Simon. And Kane Sajak. Kane, you're the co-founder of Home Guardian AI. And as we were just chatting earlier, what a great time to have AI in your company name.
Yeah, that's right. It is very timely for us. So yeah, look, Home Guardian AI, we're an artificial intelligence company, and we've built an artificial intelligence product that analyzes human behavior. And what we use that product for is actually to alert when there's abnormal or notable behavior that occurs. The idea being here that there is a staffing shortage currently that's only going to get worse over the next sort of 30 years. We can use our product to actually supplement existing staffing, both in residential aged care and the home care space. And in doing so, we're able to allow providers to care for people in a smarter and more efficient way, and also provide a better level of care to those that they do care for.
Great, thanks, Kane. And Kristen Graham, you're the founder of Dossie.
Yes, and yeah, thanks for having me, Sean. And yeah, I'm on a mission to combat social isolation and loneliness. And our technology has been co-designed and purpose-built that aims to easily connect isolated older adults with not only their family and friends, but also community volunteers. So it's simple tech to connect. And yeah, thanks again for having me. Look forward to the discussion.
No, our pleasure. Thank you. And Sam McConkey, you're the co-founder of Bear. And just before I let you sort of take it away, I might just add that Sam's business was the runner-up for the service transformation category in the Future of Aging Awards, which are produced by Inside Aging. And I make mention of that simply because it was an entry that really had the judges, there was a lot of discussion about your entry and some quite passionate responses from the judges as to why it should be recognised. And the eventual result was runner-up, but it was a hotly contested category and very much a deserved entry that was recognised. So just with that little introduction, over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Sean. Flattery will get you everywhere. Hi all, thanks for having me. Yeah, as Sean mentioned, co-founder of Bear. We're a direct-to-consumer sort of digitally enabled funeral business that's combining sort of empathy with technology to change the way sort of end of life is experienced, both for the sort of the family left behind as well as the individual themselves. I'd say that business is sort of the second cousin twice removed from this discussion in that it's tangential to aged care. I'm also sort of perhaps more directly relevantly on the board of a company called Zipline, where I was previously at, which does sort of aged care, sort of compliance technology for residential and home care in Australia. You're on mute, Sean.
Right. There is some construction work happening next to our office, so that's why I'm muting here, but thank you for that. I might just start with a question that is probably timely more so now than ever, and that's just the role of providers in trialing solutions and perhaps even investing in some solutions. And we have seen with some providers in particular, there was one in Adelaide that did do that. But Kane, I might start with you, just because you've got a trial in place right now with VMCH. Tell us a bit about the importance of that and how that's gone for you.
Yeah, look, I guess that's a little bit different, that project that we got. So that was part of a CRCP application. So it's over 3 years, roughly $10 million in value. And less of a trial. What the federal government has actually done is they've backed us for about a quarter of that project cost to take our existing technology, develop it, and build it to be able to predict falls. Ultimately, like, we have the world's leading fall detection technology, but what they want to do is take that analytical data that we are capturing, events leading up to a fall, and then build a machine learning model which will be able to alert on those predictive indicators. So it'll allow us to effectively, predict and prevent falls, which is the idea. So the federal government has backed us for that. So it's not so much a trial, but to answer your question, getting the providers to actually either trial or be early stage users and adopters and even invest in the technology, I think that is paramount in this industry, because coming at this from the tech side, right? Like, I'm a geek, I don't come at this from the care side at all. I don't know what I don't know. And if you're selling into an industry where ultimately these people are the subject matter experts, it's important to get them involved in the design and the improvement process of your product. You might have a fantastic idea, but you could be missing the mark, and you're not going to know that unless you have subject matter experts that are advising you on that. So having some friendly, early adopted users or people that you just sort of say, hey, look, I'll give you this stuff heavily discounted or free if you can give me some valuable feedback. It's worth its weight in gold. And I'd encourage every tech startup in this space to adopt that kind of strategy, at least at the start.
Right. Would anybody else, perhaps Simon, you've had some success, I think, with some providers. Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, look, I agree. Fundamentally on that, I think there's also, it's a complex one probably when you start thinking about the next stage, which are those investment elements that come into play. So you start moving into a zone of who owns the IP around that. Also, the commercialization of technology from a provider to then go and sell to other providers. It gets interesting, those kind of conversations as they develop, especially if you're working with capitalized providers that do have the kind of funds to be able to invest in new tech. I agree with Kane. I think in the early stages, it's great. It's really hard to get into the door with providers, and they can be a great access pathway to learn. I'd potentially also push back a little bit on subject matter experts 100%, and I don't disagree with that on any level. I think it's also interesting though, having startups come into the sector that look at the problems in a different way and bring that thinking. I don't think that gets lost if you have those kind of relationships with the providers, but it can be a bit of a double-edged sword sometimes, I think, as well. But we were very lucky to, in the early days, it was definitely what you would call pilots, but we were very lucky to kind of get our product in to lighthouse organizations early in the piece. And so our story was one that didn't go down that road that kind of Kane was talking to. It was more quick iteration over time and a lot of trial and error to get to the core that we have today. I definitely think there's a space for it though. Again, probably the last thing I would say is, that innovation or startup journey is a long one. it's a very expensive one, and you require a level of risk if you're going to do those kind of things. You need that appetite for that, and I think for some providers that fits. But for others, it may not. And I probably wouldn't recommend it to the general provider groups out there. It's also very hard to operationalize innovation across wide scale projects, but that's in our world. You know, I also come from predominantly home care, which is a very quickly changing field operational part of the sector. And that means they're running very, very hot to stay on top of the day-to-day, and that means innovation can be kind of hard in that environment. So don't push back against it, but it's definitely a complex one to work through for sure.
And Kristen, what's your view on this with respect to providers? And I think you've got a case study, or at least some examples that you could probably reference.
Yeah, look, I think I'm a little more early stage than Kane and Simon, but I'm finding the benefits to partnering with aged care providers. You get access to co-design, validation before you get to that product market fit. So the importance of getting it right and, you know, being purpose built is very valuable because you're making the right design and development decisions early. And for benefits for them, they're getting a solution to solve the problem that they're experiencing and having input into the solution. So I'm finding it incredibly valuable, as well as having a research partner like Melbourne University to support and build that credibility in the product and in the research has been, fantastic.
And Sam, your business is quite interesting because you're very much involved at the end of life stage for, I suppose, aged care residents or those, at least those in the care of providers. Did you actually go into a situation whereby you approached providers to maybe trial or at least work with you on the early concept design?
It's a great question, and I can sort of approach this from a couple of different angles. I think Bear is somewhat of a unique case in that our relationship with providers sort of evolved organically over time by virtue of serving families and having those families necessarily, in a lot of cases, be in institutions. We started to evolve our offer and the way we work with aged care to reflect that. But I think on first principles, sort of the heart of this topic is, I think, the sort of role of startups and aged care working together to sort of co-create. I think particularly now, and others may disagree, but sort of startups look very different 2 or 3 years ago. Particularly now, sort of startups are looking for traction and need to show traction quite quickly. And I think the risk of not working closely with aged care is that founders will go elsewhere and they'll start building a product that they can get relationships with faster in other industries. And then aged care will sort of be a module of that product over time. And it's really difficult to do that, I think, in a lot of industries. It's particularly difficult to do this within aged care. And having a sort of generic tech product with a module for aged care is just going to be far less effective over time than having a custom-built aged care product. And so important for founders, also I think really important for the sector generally, to acknowledge that the only way innovation is really impactful within the sector if it's aged care first, not aged care second. And so it almost compels a relationship so that you avoid the sort of add-on problem that we see in a lot of other industries.
That's a very valid point. It's certainly, I pick up in stories that we write. We often get solutions that have worked elsewhere, and here's a reworded press release that this solution is now available for aged care. It's quite interesting. Georgie, you're the recent you've been admitted to the AWS Healthcare Accelerator, which congratulations for that. But probably more so now than ever, you're really poised to sort of do more with providers, especially with the support of AWS. I think you're just on mute there, Georgie.
Thanks, Sean. We've actually just completed the final week of the AWS Australia and New Zealand Healthcare Accelerator, and it was it was a huge opportunity. As I said to the team running it, we came for the credits and realised halfway through just how much value we were going to sort of have by going through the program. Got socks as well. Yeah, I think it really showed to us and just the difference between tech that the industry we're selling into knows is these big old clunky legacy systems that don't talk to each other. And I think tech is quite a scary concept for the aged care sector, having sort of not been on the cutting edge of tech. But this, as you said, this next generation of innovators is actually aiming to be interoperable. Great Scrabble word, that one, and to actually reduce complexity in that busy time so that staff can get back to that one-on-one care, like the human centered care that we can't offer as innovators. So I think it's going to take some bold aged care providers who recognise that technology is a bit different these days, and we're all about working together and sharing APIs and sort of advancing as almost a cohort. And yeah, the AWS accelerator definitely opened up our sort of scope of what we're planning to do going forwards, and definitely the introduction to the global market was great as well.
Great. Yeah, we look forward to hearing more on that. I think I emailed you earlier saying just keep us in the loop, because much of what we're about is trying to share these stories. So whatever you do through the accelerator and generally achieve, we're very keen to report that back. Somebody's asked here, and this is a question, I might just bring it up now because it is topical. And there's a question that was asked a half a dozen times when people registered. And it's a simple question about how these technologies can help reduce workforce pressures. So maybe this is as a general statement. I'll try and encapsulate all of the questions into one simple question. How meaningful are the gains going to be with respect to staff by implementing the solutions that you guys have? Now, you're welcome to start, Georgie. You're on the screen now.
Yeah, great. I've got lots to say about this. And it goes back to my point that I just made. The focus for us is actually on reducing any of those sticky points in care where staff are doing busy work. So, for example, a reactive care model where you wait till someone falls over, or there's someone who's known to be aggressive, has assaulted another resident, and then there's a response to an incident, and then there's paperwork to report on that, and then there's follow-up. And in the current model of care that's very reactive and very dynamic and understaffed, as we all know, to actually get ahead of the ball and turn that reactive care environment into a preventative. So, for example, we're using computer vision and track point data to have a unique ID on individuals. If someone's known to have aggression, to be aggressive, we can actually geofence them as they move throughout the space. So we're sort of removing environmental restraints and sort of enhancing their autonomy. But as they come into proximity of another vulnerable individual, we can send a real-time alert to staff and they can intervene in a dignity-driven manner. So we're actually getting ahead of the ball. And as Kane was saying, with predicting, we're doing trend analysis on bathroom visits, and we can sort of say there's been a big shift in behaviour here. This could be indicative of a urinary tract infection that actually saves a kidney infection and hospitalisation and potentially a fall. So it's actually getting ahead of the ball, reduces the overall load on staff. And if you go down the AI and ML path, we can even be using technology that will take the spoken word of a carer in their own first language as they are responding to an incident, transfer that to a digital report in English, and then have ML looking at the breakdown and associating it with other conditions that might be sort of on the horizon or have occurred in the past. So the sky's the limit when we're actually working to reduce complexity, and it actually supports care staff in being on the floor and doing the caring, which is what they're best at and what we need them to be able to focus on. I could go for ages about
I might, yeah, I agree. And this is, as I said, this question was asked at least half a dozen times. So it's important that we stay in it just for a little bit longer. I might just go to you, Kane, because you might be you're not the oldest person here, but you've certainly got probably the oldest business or the most established business. Is it about 6 years old? Is that right?
Well, yeah, the tech has been in development since about 2017, 2018. So okay. certainly getting on there. But yeah, look, you are correct, Georgie, in a lot of what you say. The question that you asked, Sean, is actually one of the key reasons that I started Home Guardian, is that we saw this looming issue when it comes to staffing and how to alleviate some of these constraints and some of the challenges that people have with staffing and running businesses like this. So what we did is look at, okay, how can we change some of these things? And a lot of the time, like Georgie was saying, there's a lot of busy work, I guess, or just fluff work essentially, which is currently with the current model of care is essential to do. But even from an outsider's perspective, like Simon was sort of saying, from an outsider's perspective, just doing things because that's the way they've always been done isn't necessarily the right way to do them. So for us, it was how can we use technology to change some of that. So with Home Guardian, by monitoring people's behaviour, by then categorising that behaviour and looking at those trends over time and things like that, not only can we send alerts, but we can also inform care plans and inform the way that people are providing care to those individuals. So then what happens is you get more efficient staffing, you get more meaningful care being provided because you're responding when and where person-on-person care is required or is more relevant than simply doing it because you've got to do X amount of minutes on X amount of rounds or, whatever it may be. You're actually, holistically, if we look at this, strip everything away and look at the whole sector, caring for elderly people is what we're trying to do. So if we can do that in a better way that is more meaningful, then everybody sort of wins. And I think that's the goal here for a lot of us, is that yes, we're running businesses. Yes, it is, ultimately we have to have partnerships with providers and do all these kind of things, but that's ultimately the goal for a lot of us and what we're trying to do. So tech is kind of, I guess, the delivery mechanism for that ultimate outcome.
Okay. Anybody else would like to add anything?
I could just say to that quickly, it's kind of really cool to hear Kane and Georgie talk about that kind of in that residential zone, which we work quite a bit across residential, but we're very much focused in home care. And as Georgie was alluding to before, being able to gain the data out of those back office systems and then present that out into the community for, the support workers, if we talk about support worker optimization, to be able to access that information and then respond to it and do things, as well as though the administration team. So the way Halo will plug into that is we'll connect into the back office systems, the CMSs, and then be able to expose information out into the circle of care. It's the community as well, so the family members, the client themselves, and also the support workers, so they can quickly access things like care plans. They can send requests back into the office. We have a very top-down triage of decision-making in the sector, where a lot of the time is spent on that back and forth, that kind of busy work that the guys were talking about, using technology to enable teams to, as Kane was saying, move away from that busy work and provide more time down the line is kind of the goal. The end result for that in our world is self-service. We call it the holy grail, because the more of that decision-making we can decentralize or de-democratize from the provider out into the network, be it the support worker, be it the family, be it the client themselves, the less decision-making, the less load that happens on the providers in the back end. So technology is never going to replace that human element to what we do. We're a human services sector. The tech will support that. And it's exciting, that interoperability stuff that Georgie was talking about before. More and more tech now, there's public APIs you can play with. There's ways to get that information out and push it across the network very quickly to enable us to be able to, reduce those operational costs. We're seeing like 40%, sometimes 60% turnover of staff at some provider groups. So anything that we can do to turn down the noise, to make the working environment better for people, to do their jobs, which is caring. That's what they want to do. They want to do the caring, as Kane was saying, that it's going to have detrimental impacts across the whole stakeholder group.
Another question I've got here, which it's a common question for any new business, especially if you're raising capital. what is your lead time, with respect to achieving a deal? When you go out to the market, you've taken your product, you've made all the approaches. I mean, Kane, you've been around for 6 years doing this. You might have and just to preface that, I might just say everybody on this session, each of the presenters has been in the industry with their solutions for at least 2 years, so they've got some presence already. But maybe Kristen, your business might be one of the youngest. Is that right? Is it about 2 years old?
Yeah, 2 years old. Not new to the startup world.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Not new to the startup world, but definitely new to the industry with Dossie. So you're asking me about how long it takes to secure a deal?
Yeah, I'm curious in all of your opinions. So because I'm thinking it might be different for everybody, or there might very well be the same answer. But let's start with you, because you're perhaps the youngest business in aged care, at least anyway.
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to that product market fit, and whether you're, looking to solve the solution with a validated product, or whether you're looking to get in and get quick wins. I'm looking at the long game, and I think this industry sector, you can't get it wrong. And certainly with my end users are the older adults themselves. So it's so important to get it right the first time, and be really delicate in how you design and develop the product, but also, learning about the commercial model. And I'm still in that space of trialing and piloting the product. So I probably can't answer that, because, how long's a piece of string when you're in pilot?
Well, Simon, you have been around probably as long as Kane. Am I right in saying that? You've been around 5 or 6 years?
Yep, I have heaps of battle scars in this zone, so I could probably, Kirsten, if you ever need a shoulder to cry on, you just let me know. Look, yeah, for sure. So for us, again, you're exactly right. Like product market fit plays a massive role in it. We are seeing that time to close decrease as our value proposition gets better, at our ability to implement gets better, at our ability to tell our story and share the value and ROI and all those kind of things. And that sales process funnel mechanism that I kind of look after in growth is definitely a key element of that. Look, the sector, generally speaking, we've had deals close within 3 months, but I would generally say it's a 12-month kind of an engagement. We're a relationship-based sector. They say it's slow in, slow out, which is hard to get in, but once you're in, it's great, because the providers tend to stay with you through those relationships and through innovating the technology. So for us, it's a hard sector to start in, but once you get in and you get that reputation, and you start to get some of that understanding of how that network works across a provider. For us as well, we're B2B SaaS as well. So we're complex solution selling across multiple teams, and similar in the sense that we connect the client themselves to our technology, plus family members, plus support workers, plus multiple people within the back office admin teams. And then you've got to motivate the executive group. So there's a lot of moving parts to sales inside care, especially in our world, in the home care team that has a lot of that administration side of it as well. So relationship and process are really the things outside of that value proposition work is super, super, super important to lock down, and focusing on that core problem of what we do.
And Georgie, do you have a view on this, the period of time it takes to secure a client or a deal? And I'm asking that question also in the context of the AWS Healthcare Accelerator. Was that a key criteria? Did they ask that question?
I would say, and I would agree that it's quite different, but it would be very unlikely for an early stage startup like ours to have a contract come to fruition under sort of 9 months to a year, because we're establishing credibility as a solution. And as an outsider coming in as a UX UI designer, sort of solutions focused, I don't have 30 years as a clinical governance in an aged care facility. So I've actually had to align quite closely with credible individuals or groups that are already respected within the industry. So that, and AWS is definitely part of that, to be able to say that we have a robust, scalable tech solution that you can trust, and it's got great security, and it's, you know, world-class accreditation is really of huge value to us. And as I made the joke earlier about going for the credits and coming away with a lot more, that's one of the really valuable outcomes for us from being involved in that accelerator. And then also, as Kristen was saying, removing barriers for uptake, because this is the whole sector is doing, all of the stakeholders in the sector are undergoing digital transformation. It's families, it's the residents, it's the carers, not just the aged care providers, residential aged care providers, who are our target market. So we actually have to bring the whole community along on the journey, and which is why on that credibility piece, I've co-designed a research project with Professor Terry Haynes, who is head of school at primary and allied health at Monash, which we just received the ARIA federal funding grant for, which is fantastic, where we're actually engaging with all of the stakeholders in the sector and building social license essentially for observation technology and care. So we're listening to what their concerns are about dignity and privacy and security. We're talking to aged care providers and unions and carers to ensure that as we digitally transform, everyone comes along for the journey, and those barriers, which we know are going to be an issue when it comes to selling into these spaces and actually making this change, is all taken care of. So it's a long road. But yeah, as Kristen said, I think you have to do it right, and it's a very sensitive sector who have, you know, we've all looked at the Royal Commission and sort of been horrified at what it's revealed, and we know that there needs to be change. So we have to carefully and thoughtfully go forwards and establish that trust. Yeah,
I think it's worth.
I might go to you, Sam. Yeah, because you'd have a very interesting point of view from both sides, consumer and business, I suppose.
Yeah, certainly deal cycle's less relevant on the bear side for obvious reasons, but we saw this really interesting through Zipline around COVID, and I think worth layering over this whole conversation, sort of macro matters and your sort of personal problem and where that fits within an aged care's Maslow's hierarchy of needs also really matters. And so Zipline back in 2020 was a sort of platform and technology that would automate sort of compliance and visitor management and took temperature. That was bloody helpful at the start of COVID. And so we sort of positioned that product to be somewhat of a vaccination and visitor management check for RAC, and multiple $100,000 deals were closing from first call to signed in weeks. I think days in some cases. Storm in a bottle, it will never happen again. The product is now sort of 3 years old. It's actually much more robust and complete in what it offers, but just that Maslow's hierarchy looks different for an aged care provider now. And so somewhat of the go-to-market challenge is, how do I reposition what I do? How do I rethink what I offer so that I get a little bit higher up the sort of Maslow's hierarchy relative to sort of what's most important to the aged care provider? And some of that is, you know, those cards are dealt to you by virtue of what the problem is that you're solving. But there is an element of sort of positioning your solution in a way that sort of best maps to aged care or home care needs.
There's a question that has been asked about funding, and you can probably see it there, but I'll read it out for the benefit of those people on the call. All startups are facing funding issues lately. How much dependence is there on grants and R&D credits? And what can we ask government to improve for social innovation? You mentioned, Georgie, ARIA, and you're a recipient of an ARIA grant. And I mean, what's your comment on that? How helpful has it been? And you know, what are you going to do with it, essentially?
Any runway is good runway when you're an early stage startup. So probably going to pay my developers with it. Yeah, I mean, for us, the grant is very helpful because we can't afford to be to have me off product as a product owner, and to be too distracted unless there's a really valuable outcome. And also as I was saying, the credibility that comes with the acknowledgement that what we're doing is worth federal government throwing some coin at is actually all part of preparing the sector to trust us as a credible solution. So very helpful. But yeah, one can't live on grants alone, unfortunately. We need to sort of, yeah, we're looking for investment at the moment, if you can't tell by my runway comment.
You're doing a very good job, actually. No, that might be a nice segue, and I'm not going to put anybody on the spot here because I can appreciate there's probably some sensitivity around what you can talk about with respect to grants, funding, investment, but open to anybody who wants to comment on grants they may have achieved or funding they may have secured through investors. Just an observation on what that was and how it came about.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit to this one. Oh, sorry, Chris, you go.
I was just going to kick off the back of the ARIA grant. Yeah, the ARIA grant's been a godsend for DOSI. It's given us not only the credibility in what we're trying to achieve and problem we're trying to solve, but also gives the opportunity to work with research partner and an aged care provider and collaborate together on just at a different level, the compliance and documentation involved. It just puts me as an early stage startup, it gives me that layer and level of prestigiousness, I suppose, in terms of what's required to deliver. And I think in terms of funding, the valley of death is real for startups prior to product market fit or even early stage revenue, where investors, unless you're AI, Kane, sorry, they don't necessarily want to know what you're doing at this stage until you've got that scale. So I think, yeah, we do rely on R&D and government grants. So thanks, Aria.
Yeah, look, I would agree with you. And being an AI company sure doesn't make us immune to that valley of death. Trust me, there's been a couple of very difficult conversations that we had in the early days with runway being, several weeks and things like that. So sometimes you manage to pull a rabbit out of the hat, and that's what we managed to do a few times. But to answer your question, and to answer George's question that I can see there, those R&D credits are absolute saving graces for a lot of companies that I know in the sector. And, while yes, there are grants, like we've received a couple of grants, part of the project I mentioned earlier, that some of that is grant funded. I guess what my advice to other startups in the sector is, if there are grants available, not just to you, but to providers potentially that you can leverage, that's a really nice sort of segue, right? Because sometimes that provider is not going to purchase from you because, like in our instance, we were the new kids on the block, talking about something that had never been done before. People thought it was fairy tales mostly at the start. So for us to go and say, hey, look, can we have a crack at this grant together? It sort of reduces their risk profile because they're going, well, we're not really having to reach into our pocket quite as much or at all. And, we might get some free stuff that if it does work, the upside is great. If it doesn't work, well, the pain is not quite so bad because we're not really footing the bill for the whole thing. It's a really nice sort of way to I guess, give you an easy in with some providers. So I would definitely say that's a good way to approach it. So don't necessarily look at grants just for you as the company. Look at grants that are available to your potential customers as well. And that really helped us, particularly during COVID, because unfortunately we weren't measuring temperature or checking people in, unlike Sam. So yeah, it was pushing the proverbial uphill for a while there.
And I think if we just mention, you're talking specifically about your arrangement with VMCH. Is that the case?
Yeah, correct. So yeah, VMCH and Deakin University.
Right. Okay. So that's very interesting. That's great advice, what you've just shared with everybody. Anybody else would like to share something about their experience in the world of grants or, as I said earlier, investment, attracting an investment?
I'd probably just extend on Kane. Kane's comments there. We've probably been more of a traditional venture capital startup road, I think. But in the early days, a bit of R&D and those kind of things. We were lucky to get to revenues somewhat early in the process, but definitely a lot of cold Christmases over the years with that runway conversation. But more and more, over the time, we've also, as Kane was saying, we've been involved in helping write grants for providers, and I think that's an awesome avenue to go down as a sales tool as well. If you can find the grant and bring that in as part of the project. We've had providers recently purchase our technology these days from grants that they've accessed as well. So that one's a great one. Never really went down that grant road ourselves. We did try a couple of times, and I think just in the early days, we just didn't have the resource or the capability to be able to manage the workload and the grant writing process. So we kind of bailed on them and then just went back to building the business, So, but yeah, that's probably the only other comment I would say.
There's a question that's come in, and it is funding related, so I might just go to that now. The productivity report last week highlights the need for support for social good workforce. Any suggestions on how we can leverage this to support age tech innovation? Anybody want to share a comment on that? It's interesting. Social good workforce. I mean, when I wrote the story that introduced this session, I think I pulled out some quotes, or at least some descriptions that really describe you people, and a social conscience was part of it, because I think all of you are doing this to achieve a common good, specifically to the business of aged care. And I think that's interesting. I think that makes the whole industry of this area, I suppose, whether it's startup or innovation or just doing new things, it makes it so much more interesting because the solutions are inherently good. These are good solutions that have a good outcome on a whole bunch of levels, not just business levels, but from a social point of view.
Yeah, I think on that, our technology started from my grandfather and Greg, the other co-founder. His grandmother was within care, and that the story of our technology was birthed from that personal, like we're going back to Sam's point before, we are only aged care and community care. We don't work in any other sector. Not that we don't have interest in scaling potentially into other places one day, but we're very much focused on that social impact side. And I think it creates a different type of mission and meaning to the work that you do, and also in the way that you tell the stories and share the product around. I think going back to the investment thesis, which is maybe a little bit off the topic of that question as such, but finding investors and aligning to organizations that share those values, I think is a pretty powerful thing to be able to bring into it. How that plays out as far as that productivity report, I'm not exactly sure, but it's definitely, it's definitely a sector that responds to that kind of care and that kind of social impact. And for us as well, like even when you look at things like that, we did an incubator accelerator with Care Factor. We ended up teaming up with Sprint VC out of that, and they're a mission focused VC. Social Ventures is another one of our groups that we work with, and having been aligned to all of those different types of groups has really helped our journey along the way. I don't know if that's actually to do with that Productivity Commission report, but that's some thoughts anyway.
We're getting towards the end, so I might finish with a last question. And I'll go to you on this one, Sam, first. I'll give everybody a chance to respond. But I'm going to Sam first because you've got 2 points of view. You've got the point of view of Zipline. I think you're a director of Zipline, which grew very fast during COVID. And you're also the co-founder of Bear, which has also had significant success. So the question is, and everybody will get the same question, if you could turn back the clock, what would you do differently?
I mean, I think if we go back to certainly, actually, let me answer it through the lens of Bear. I think Bear was born early 2020, which was a sort of period of capital excess, I would say, in venture world, and sort of metrics of success were just really poorly aligned between venture capitalist founders and actually the consumers that you serve. And it caused severe, not so much that it affected the customer, but it certainly caused sort of decision making that wasn't consistent with building a good foundational based generational business. And it took us some time as sort of the venture window closed to sort of wind back some of the thinking into what does this look like if we build this, of our own profitability over generations. And so I would say we've still got some of the internal scar tissue from growing too quickly and sort of chasing metrics that actually weren't consistent with a fundamentally good business over generations. And so I would say the thing I would do differently is sort of have that mindset at the start versus getting caught up in the sort of hype cycle of 2020, 2021 and building a business for VCs rather than for families.
Mm. And Kane, you look back on 6 years. What would you have done differently in 2017?
Oh, mate, that crystal ball would have come in handy, I'll tell you that much. To be completely honest with you, we were in a pretty unique situation when we started the company, running straight into COVID, right? But I would definitely advise anybody who's looking to get started in this sector in Australia to think about what your end goal is, right? Like, is this the business that you want to run until you retire, or is it a business that you're looking to exit in the next sort of 5, 6, 7 years? Like, what is your plan to start in this sector? The aged care sector and industry in Australia is different in that, like Simon was talking about the sales cycles, not coming from this care sector, coming from, running other tech companies to then running a tech company in aged care. I was just absolutely floored, pardon the pun with falls protection, absolutely floored with how almost uncommercially slow the sales cycle can be in this sector, in that it's not a government-run sector, but it is government-funded. All the money is government-funded, so the justification for spend and things like that has that government kind of feel. If you've ever dealt with government, right? Decisions happen slowly, and there's very low appetite for risk. Being a tech startup with a brand new product means that there's an inherent risk when people are buying your stuff. So it's like doesn't go well. If I could have my time over, I would probably weigh up whether or not we even started in Australia and started overseas, because having gone overseas since starting in Australia, the appetite for purchase is instantly different and the market size is very different. So not that I don't love Australia, right? I'm born and bred here. This is where I'll be when I die. But ultimately, if we're looking at having to cash flow a startup that isn't generating revenue for 12 months, 18 months, I've been working on deals since we started, that kind of thing, it's almost impossible to do without, various rounds of capital, some solid R&D grant refunds. It's actually getting some sales along the way. So yeah, look, hindsight's always 20/20, but it would definitely be a tough decision as to whether or not we started here or we started somewhere else and had Australia running in parallel at the same time.
Interesting. I didn't expect that response, but thank you.
I'm just being honest, right? If people are going to take some insights away from this call, then I'd rather get some solid ones. So I can see Simon laughing quite a bit at that response.
No, you've actually given me, well, thank you, because you've actually also given me a topic for the next one of these. I think we might try and bring in a speaker from overseas and get an opinion from somebody who has probably done what you maybe should have done, at least are based overseas. And we do carry some stories from people who have launched overseas, so I'll chase them up. Kristen, how about you?
Look, I've learned a lot and over the last 10 years of building technology, and am ensuring that I've put those learnings into action. But I think one crucial thing I did wrong with Dossi was think of it as a consumer product in the first instance, and thinking that families would support their loved ones to get onto the tech. So I've had to pivot and become a B2B solution to support scale in a different way. And, with the Royal Commission and the requirements today on social isolation. And I think, had I have done that a little differently in the beginning, it would have supported to where I'm at now, for sure.
Right. Simon, you mentioned battle scars earlier, so I suspect you'd have a strong opinion on this.
I would do it all differently if I had the time again. Every single thing. No, but I think, like as Kristen was saying, we have a similar story to that in the earlier days. It was kind of like throwing mud at a wall, seeing what would stick. We would also go down the rabbit hole of trying to be everything for everybody and building things that maybe we shouldn't have built. We went the very true startup kind of quick iteration lean methodologies, but that's also what helped us get to product market fit quickly and understand, with the baptism of fire, so to speak. I think on reflection, probably honing into a niche within a niche. The aged care sector is a niche in itself, but going even further into the niche of the problem that we were trying to solve. Again, access is hard at the start, so trying to understand what it is that we were trying to do and then solve from that position. I think it took us quite a few years to know what we were and understand that problem that we were solving. I don't know whether you can do that quickly, but it felt like a very long and wide road to get back to the middle, so to speak. I think I can't agree with Sam more on the fact of kind of go slow to go fast, especially with the capital environment now. It's definitely changed. The sector, as Kane was saying, is a slow sector. Run it like a business, run lean, only grow when you can grow. Kane, you make me want to jump on a plane now and go and start looking at other areas. That's why I was laughing so much. I'm like, okay, maybe it's time to jump on the plane and get overseas. So yeah, and I think and I don't know whether it's maybe more of just a kind of a final point on it, but I think just the importance of, I guess, the way that we built recognition over our journey was through brand, which is maybe a different avenue that the sector's kind of used to, but we were really content forward and digital forward and brand forward. And, as a young company, that's a really powerful way to scale out your capability for brand recognition. And I think leaning in on that, I probably would have went even harder. I don't know if we could have, but in reflection, probably going a little bit harder on that brand element to what we do, because it's, I think that's kind of an important one. But I could rant about this one for a while, though, so I'll stop.
And Georgie, last but not least, what's your view on your journey?
How long have we got? I actually think I'm actually really personally connected to the vulnerable people element, and that's always been my driver. And I didn't really wear that story on my sleeve for the first 3 years. I think one of my current investors kind of pulled it out of me. And when I actually sort of embraced that it was, being born into domestic violence and going into that environment and thinking these vulnerable people should feel safe, and they're currently voiceless and powerless and trapped, essentially. That has always felt like a Trojan horse that I have to come in with. We can automate your compliance reporting, and we can, sort of use ML to see when somebody's ANCAP could be bumped up, and I'm sort of coming in, and inside the Trojan horse is keeping the elderly safe because they can't do it for themselves. And I wish I'd actually been a bit more balanced in that, more of a two hats than a Trojan horse, and also been a little bit more forward with my own connection to the problem. And I think the other thing I would have done differently is actually a people in the team thing, in that I've always been preaching this, we're a startup about caring for people as whole individuals and these whole lives of the elderly, and thinking of the whole system of residential aged care, and saying to my team, I want you to take time off, and I want you to, go and play with your kids, and you don't have to be on product till midnight. And then I'm pinging everyone on Slack when I have an idea, or I've, put a pull request in or whatever. And I modelled something that was different to my own behavior. Well, I modelled something that was different to what I was trying to instill in my team. And I've had a couple of people burn out, and I actually feel quite personally responsible for that. And I still haven't got it right. So any hot tips, you could get my email afterwards. But yeah, that's something I would do differently.
Right. Thank you to everybody, for being so honest, because these are all very personal stories. And you've all been very generous to share your journeys, your business, and thanks to everybody who came along to listen. As I said earlier, this will be the start of what we hope is a regular series. And thanks to Kane, I will be reaching out to some people overseas to see if we can have a perspective from overseas-based entrepreneurs. So the recording from today will be available in a couple of hours on the Inside Aging website. And I'll include a link to the websites for each of the presenters. So if you do want to get in touch with them, you're welcome to do that. So thanks again to our presenters. I really appreciate your time and your honesty. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. That was
Thanks
great.
for having us, Sean.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.